Nigel and Yu-Ning, thank you so much for joining us here today. Nigel, you're an architect, author, and academic who's dedicated much of your career to understanding cities. And Yu-Ning, you're very much involved in the shaping and development of Singapore's scarcest resource, land, both from a strategic standpoint as well as a public policy level. So it's going to be really interesting to hear how both your viewpoints intersect. You've both brought some images to share with us today, but Nigel, I think before we start, could you explain a little bit about why good urban planning and design is so important today?
Well, because cities are getting kind of denser, heavier, thicker, and more optimized. I know that in London, there's no kind of space left, no cracks left like there used to be in the 80s when it was possible to be creative. So, you know, a healthy city, a creative city, needs to have breathing spaces in between the big monsters of buildings. Mm-hmm.
And how does this sort of tackle pertinent issues like climate change and population increase?
Well, obviously cities are great consumers, but we're learning consumers of energy, and we've basically got too many people on the planet. Mm-hmm. So I think it'd be better if there were more gay people, for example, because we wouldn't have so many children. That's the solution.
That's a thought, yeah.
But we've got to be careful about, I mean, I must say, I love cities, and one of the reasons I went to London from the countryside was because it created unknown experiences, offered possibilities that you couldn't imagine. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a key factor of what makes cities attractive. So we've got to keep that up. We've got to keep up the metropolitan, cosmopolitan condition, mm-hmm. because that's part of why people live in cities. Part of it is also because they need to work and have a quality of life. But there's another dimension too to cities, which is the magic that cities can offer. Mm-hmm. And we have to keep that as a possibility. It's mm-hmm. going to be more and more difficult.
Yeah. Let's take a look at some of your work.
Well, I'm going to show you just a couple of things. This is something I did a while ago. But it's the National Centre for Popular Music in Sheffield. Mm-hmm. But I'm showing it to make a few points. Sheffield, as you may know, was a great steel-making city. Most of the cutlery in Britain and the Empire came from Sheffield. So it seemed a good idea to make the building out of steel. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's 4 drums, like a drum kit. Sheffield was also well known for popular music, which is why they wanted a museum there. But on the left, you see the current master plan for the development of this central area around my building. And my building was sort of based on the idea of freedom of movement. The 4 drums make a cross of space which connect to the kind of the gridded organization of streets around it. Mm-hmm. So the idea was that people could flow easily through the building without, excuse me, that's my timer. Stop.
That's fast.
Yes, it was. Give me 3 minutes. But in the foreground of this is a small public space which is based on a pinball machine, which I thought was a good metaphor for how I wanted people to experience this building. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to show you something, I mean, possibly unlike anything else that you've seen on the screen. This is a project that I'm doing with students in London for an area in Florence. Now, Florence, you know, one of the most historically significant cities in Europe. But with the new high-speed train station that's being built underground by Norman Foster, it creates big questions about how you continue the urban fabric up to this very new and fast condition of being able to get speedily from Rome to Milan without going into the old station, which would mean that you'd have to go in and then they'd have to change locomotive and then go out the other way. So in this way, the piece of celery is the new station. Yes. And you can see the railway lines make a kind of triangle. And that's got an old kind of locomotive cleaning facility, a bit like the Roundhouse in London. But here, it's emerging from the work done with the students. So this was done in an afternoon.
Yeah.
I told the students to bring onions, potatoes, and celery, and carrots. Because I thought that carrots might suggest the rooftops of Florence, and they actually do. But together, these vegetables form the beginning of the ragu sauce, which is the sofrito. So we called it sofrito planning. And hopefully, this way of planning actually can take local ideas, even if they were London students. I wanted them to understand how important food is in Italy. So this sort of approach to the city is about kind of joining up the culture of the place, a freedom of kind of experiences. Anyway, I just got a couple of others, and I'm showing you a drawing. I don't know if you've seen any drawings done by hand.
Yeah, we don't see these very much anymore.
I don't know whether they're so over that maybe there's time for the drawing to come back.
It's time for a drawing renaissance, definitely.
So in this drawing, you see the same area. The station has got this kind of wiggle on it because that's a kind of beautiful way of tying up the two sides of the very dividing effect of the railway line. The old cleaning sheds have become a sort of whirl of gallery spaces. A modern art museum which Florence never had. Sorry, it's Hollywood. And I like to think of that as a bistecca alla fiorentina there. It's like a steak.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I work, and how I get the students to work is to bring the metaphors they can muster. Now, just one other thing to tell you about this is that on the top side, there are two piazzas, let's say. The piazza are obviously very important for the Italian city. And a piazza in an original city would have had, the main piazza would have had the town hall, the cathedral, and the palazzi of the prominent families. Well, I thought that here we should have palazzi dedicated to the most powerful brands in Florence, which are Gucci, Ferragamo, and I'm going to say, because I like a glass of wine, Antinori. So each of these piazzas, you know, like the Martini sign in the Piazza del Duomo in Milan, could kind of celebrate and talk to the people going on the high-speed trains and also to the local people. In between, there are a couple of others building aggregates, one for visitors who want to see Florence but kind of within an experience and then leave on the high-speed train without actually going into Florence at all, which would be very helpful for the quality of life of Florentines. And also an artisanal centre. So, you know, various kind of programming elements which in these kind of energy swirls give you an idea of how each of the narratives of each of these suggest a kind of streaming of ideas and experiences within the city, which is really my way of working.
Yeah. Ole Sharon touched on, you know, the idea of creating coherence between buildings and public spaces on day one. Do you think this is a necessity or purely aesthetic?
Well, we've been talking about kind of sympathy and disruption as a possible strategy. And sometimes I think a disruptive coexistence is good. But awareness may be more important. So if you're going to do something disruptive, like the fourth plinth in London, for example, often the items the sculptures that are put on that plinth are very provocative. And the public likes that. They don't shy away from it. Not everything has always got to be nice. So niceness, not. But awareness, yes.
Yu-Ning, on that note, you've brought some examples of creative city hacks to show how Singapore is maximizing space. Could you elaborate a little bit more?
Let's cue up the image. Well, this is just a whole bunch of different things that people have done. And it's really about trying to bring in the community, working with the community to, in a way, bring in different ideas into the city and just try out whether it works for the space. because sometimes the people who use it daily are the ones who understand the space most and know what it needs. And City Hack is a good way to work with the community to almost like beta test some of the ideas that we might have for the space. Because beyond just doing evidence planning, which is very data-driven, sometimes some of this kind of tactical work on the ground just enlivens the space and brings a different element, because cities are too complex that you may want to just try out some of these ideas sometimes. So we've been working with a lot of the community to test the different ideas, prototype the ideas. This is a cute sketch by Xing Li, one of our friends. And in this space, actually this is in front of my office. Some of you may recognize this as the URA Center. So you see on the top left that that was the original condition of the space. And we thought we'd try City Hack in our own front room to see how it works. It was quite a cold, hard space. People just come and go and don't really dwell. We work with a local urban initiative, Play It Forward, which restores old pianos into art installations and make them playable again. And we just roll out some AstroTurf, toss in some loose furniture, and suddenly it's a really successful social space. The community around it use it. The lunch crowd loves it to sit around. We get all sorts of strangers coming through to play on the piano. I often feel like I want to interview them and ask them what's their story, what happened to their own piano and why are they playing so much on ours. Because it's just a whole range of people from different walks of life. And it sparked a community initiative that they have a weekly piano playing session. So if you're in town over the weekend, this is a space to play and to meet people. So that's nice. And through this beta testing, we've decided to kind of leave it permanently. So that's a good way to try out different ideas on the spaces. And I think in doing different tests, and it's really design is a really important element of doing urban spaces, I think. The design consideration. So here's a little example which speaks to greenery and the connector. On the top right, you see the plan, and we were installing a pedestrian bridge that, from planning perspective, brings better access to the two hill parks on either side. So the red is where the pedestrian bridge would be. And functionally, you could serve the purpose with just any old regular pedestrian functional bridge. But we thought we really want to make it a place of memory and something special. So we worked very closely with designers to come up with this very beautiful design that now it's become a place of memory for people. People love to go there, not just to exercise between the hill parks, which that's a great function as well, but it's become a place of memory, a place you want to put in your wedding album that you want to capture, and it's just a lovely space. So beyond functional planning, urban design and design itself is such an important feature in creating our urban landscape.
It's no secret that Singapore's urban plan is greatly emulated. How would you explain some of its success, Yu-Ning?
I guess there are a lot of different challenges and trends out there, but for Singapore, our enduring challenge is that of land constraint. How do we design well for a city and a country? And in a way, we only have one city, so we can't mess it up too much. We don't really have room to run into somewhere else and start anew. So we want to try and get things right. So I think we have kind of worked on three enduring principles. One is having a long-term view on what we want to do for the country and what we need to plan for. The other is taking a comprehensive approach, working with a lot of different partner agencies and the community and the private sector, because the planning agency can't do it all alone. And the third is probably transparency, keeping it transparent, letting people know what's going on. And once we do a plan, we don't just put it aside and keep using it. We take it out, refresh it, review it all the time, because city is so complex that there are a lot of changing conditions. So by refreshing the plan, it's a good pause for us to think again about whether there are new things that we need to tweak or adjust the plans, and other new long-term things that we need to put in place in motion at the moment that would work towards that long-term vision.
I might be biased because I'm Singaporean. So, you know, Nigel, how would you like to weigh in on Singapore?
Well, I'm just wondering
Yes, Nigel.
how you, I mean, it's all very well kind of planning the public spaces and all, but you can't plan the public spaces without the buildings that go with them.
Yeah.
I mean, how much influence do you have over the buildings that house people and house the workspaces and play spaces in the city?
I guess our influence come at least a couple of levels. One, it's at the very broad macro land use plan. So the planning agency decides where the land users go. But when the development proposals come in, we also work very closely with the developers.
And you squeeze them for more public space.
Well, up front, we try to do a guidance plan on where we want to see the urban places.
Like that, guidance plan,
There will be a public space here.
Yeah, but because we also do development control, so we have, in a way, the final say on the planning approval. So we have the opportunity to do that as well.
There's a lot of bravado in Singapore's buildings, isn't there? You know, that's its building, and that's our building, and that's so-and-so's building.
Yeah.
The architectural ambition seems to be in the buildings and not in the spaces in between. Is that a fair comment?
Well, I think in the spaces in between, we want to make sure they are well-mannered spaces, that generally the city functions well as a whole, as a collective, and people can flow from space to space, and there are public spaces for people to enjoy. So we want elements of fun and excitement, but maybe we leave the bravado to the architecture.
Well, I think that you know, when I was walking around the central area, the downtown area the other night, I was really surprised by a kind of sense of humanity of around the Toyo Ito building, for example. There are beautiful lamps that has been commissioned by the developer, and lovely little mushroom seats, and of course your immense growth of planting everywhere, that things just grow. I mean, that is such a fantastic advantage.
Yes.
There is, of course, the humidity, which is slightly at odds with the...
It's a package deal, Nigel. What can I say?
Take the pros or the cons.
But the quality of the environment, for somebody walking around, the traffic seemed to be very constrained. Not kind of belting, no, not like being in New York.
Right.
It's much more kind of slow and human scale. And that seems to be a good compliment to me to the massive scale of the buildings. And of course, you're in a constrained island, and although a lot of the building in Singapore is quite low, I think where the majority of people live in public housing, they're relatively kind of benign, all the same, all standardized, because that's another problem in public space, is you don't really want standardization.
We should bring Nigel out to the public housing areas to do a tour of the different types. But certainly, I think maybe there's a little bit more uniformity. But over time, we've also been trying to address that as well with more differentiated housing estates. And you point to greenery, which is also one of the fantastic things that we are trying to enhance in Singapore. I'm sure you see the roadside greenery, the streetscape greenery that's already very much present. And that started way back in the 70s when we started with the green planting. But now we're trying to bring it up into the vertical spaces, the buildings. And
well, that's what I find really exciting about the way that Singapore is likely not just to go up. In fact, I think towers are really old hat, actually. They're kind of over. But if you could make, as Oli Sheeran suggested the other day, that if you could start to layer and make, you know, multiple grounds.
That's right.
I mean, I can imagine Singapore being a 3D city.
Yes.
Which is not the same as kind of a flat city that then pushes up singular buildings.
That's definitely something we're striving towards, because it's...
You don't have earthquake stuff.
No, we're kind of lucky in that. So this notion of bringing the greenery up to the different layers.
Yes, you're doing it.
In fact, we want
well.
to create a green carpet. So we're working very closely with architects and developers to constantly enhance the guidelines that we have in this greenery replacement, as well as build up the industry know-how in how to do that landscaping well, such that the maintenance is not like crazy.
We're already running out of time, but I wanted to see if anyone had any questions out there. Nobody? Okay, so I'll close with a final question, which is how do businesses and corporations stand to benefit from good urban planning and design?
Well, my take is that it's, in a way, it's an existential issue for Singapore because, like I said, we're only a city and a country. You know, this is the one spot we have. So urban planning and design is very important to us to make the place good living environment, as well as to attract talent as well. So that's important.
Great.
Yeah, it's a very, strives for a happier, more rewarding, more stimulating, more discoverable urban experience.
Great. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay.